So this leads actually to my next question. So the sense is kind of underappreciated, right? And we don't have as much research done yet as in comparison to vision, for instance, right? So now at this point in time, how can we move forward? Basically, how can we harness it? And from your perspective, can technology help? Is it ready? What should we pay attention at the moment when it comes to, let's say, mediated touch technologies?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think technology is going to be a huge part of thinking about touch research moving forward, particularly because one of the things that we know from a lot of, not just my own work, but also from several labs around the world, even going back to 2015 onwards, people have been reporting that more and more people say they have a lack of touch in their lives. They feel they're not getting the amount of touch that they need. And for some people, these are connected to things like loneliness, depression, anxiety, and things like this. And they say some of that is because they haven't got people around to touch, right? They haven't got that chance, or they do, but people aren't giving it to them to some degree. And I think actually,
so we have a scientific proof of that, right? That people are actually deprived from touch.
So yeah, so for instance, in our 2020 study, we asked people, about their experience with touch in their lives, and we found that 54% of people in the worldwide sample, that 40,000 people, said they don't have enough touch in their lives.
54, right?
54. Only 4% said
wow.
only 4% said they had too much. So 54% was the highest proportion. As time has gone on, there was a study that came out later in that year. Admittedly, we had COVID restrictions, right? But 80% of people in that study were reporting they weren't having enough touch in their lives. And prior to all of this work from Corey Floyd, who's based at the University of Arizona, had shown that people who had more touch hunger, which is what we tend to talk about this about, it's not so much touch deprivation, it's touch hunger, because touch deprivation means you're completely deprived. Touch hunger means you're not getting the amount of touch that you desire, which is an important distinction, right? Because you might have, perceptively, people might say, well, you get loads of touch in your life, but if it's not aligning with your needs, that's where the challenges kick in, right? Yeah. And this is quite a serious thing. And I do think technology offers some opportunities to help here. And there is data coming out already showing how some touch substitutes, whether that's, cushions that breathe and you can hold and they hug, or robotic pets, or different types of touch technology through haptics, where, I don't know, even let's say you wear a bracelet and someone sends you a signal on your wrist, that's a tactile signal, but just to show you they're thinking of you, these types of things can have impacts, at least on some of the physiological responses.
But that's the question. Can we make a point here? So when someone sends you some sort of tactile output, right, or tactile message, you call it, right, in a simple way, does it have a physiological effect, or maybe it's more about the meaning and more like our comprehension that someone is thinking about us without actually feeling that physiological effect from actual touch?
So I think that's a really important question. I think research is now looking to unpack, right? So is a digital touch the same in terms of the receptors and the responses to an actual touch? And the likelihood is, if you're getting a vibration versus someone stroking your arm, that's going to activate a very different receptor, right? Practically.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting towards.
But an important part of why touch helps us is because of what it means. So I mentioned earlier about a study. This was done by researchers at Carnegie Mellon and a range of other universities back in 2014, I think, or maybe 2015. My memory of the years slightly off there, but basically what they did was they tracked people for 2 weeks, and they just asked them a series of questions, diary study, and in one of it they said, how often are you getting a hug? And then after those 2 weeks, they brought people into the lab and they exposed them to a virus, and it was like a common cold, right? And they saw, and then they quarantined these people and saw how likely is the virus to develop? What is the symptom development? And what they found was the people who had more hugs 14 days before were less likely to develop the virus symptoms. So there was this relationship. One of the important reasons why hugs had that effect was because people said the hugs conveyed a meaning of social support. So that it wasn't just the physical act of someone hugging you, it was the meaning of that hug as well, right? The hug conveyed social support. So you might
But then-
imagine if you have a digital touch that conveys social support, it may carry some benefits. Yeah, because you don't necessarily need to have that. If part of it is about showing our support to one another, in principle, you might be able to do that through tech. I don't think tech will do it all, but in principle, there's some scope.
But I'm still wondering, then we could translate the same meaning through a text message, right?
Yep.
Would be the same meaning, right? But touch is very powerful. The real touch is very powerful from the perspective of conveying the emotion, right?
Yep.
And it actually does it in a very implicit way, right? Somewhat. So that's why the question is that can this tactile or mediated touch technology be more powerful just because it's affecting our skin receptors versus just our vision and comprehension?
And I think that's a really important point. So go back to that hugging study, right? The fact that hugs convey social support explains some of the variance in the data. It doesn't explain all of it. So some of it is about that physical connection. And I think that's harder.
Exist, right?
That's harder to get through tech. But on the flip side, if I'm playing devil's advocate, there is now some tech coming out where people can convey emotions through the tech and people can detect the emotions. So there's this really interesting work on mid-air touch. So this is using things like ultrasound waves. And actually, you know, if, for instance, we were in the same room right now and I was trying to convey to you, I don't know, an emotion of anger or an emotion of sympathy through touch, and I was physically doing that, you'd be pretty good at detecting that emotion. These are the kind of emotions we can detect quite well with touch. But there are now research asking people to do the same thing, but rather than someone else touching them, they're experiencing it through mid-air touch, through these ultrasound waves, and someone else is trying to convey through those waves that emotion, and they're just as good. They're good at detecting with ultrasound waves and this mid-air touch. So the emotions. So arguably, there is a potential in the future where that might get better. I don't think it's there yet, you know, but
it's just a matter of technology, of understanding those parameters, how to tweak them in a way to like really stimulate its feelings, right?
But also, I mean, keep in mind, we're talking about this as touch, right? There's another problem or challenge for tech, which is, you know, the smell of someone when they touch you will impact your response. The look of someone when they touch you will impact. So how do you, if you're really going to try and capture it, and this for me is why I don't think you could ever really capture the full sensory experience, right? Because you've got to blend all those things together to really get to it. Yeah, but I do think there are ways. I think there are some ways in which the technology can be helpful, and I think data is starting to show that. You know, so if you are particularly isolated, having technology to provide you some tactile interaction, I think that could be a good thing. However, is it as good as a real person? That's a different question.
It needs to be tested much further, definitely. But